you have to love yourself in order to be loved. Like, no one's going to love you if you don't love yourself first. Like, that stuff was everywhere. And let me tell you, that was so damaging to my mental health as a teenager, hearing that stuff. I can't even begin to tell you how damaging that was. Hello, welcome. Trauma-Informed SLP here. I'm Kim Neely. On this channel, I like to examine human communication and connection in an effort to, build more compassion and understanding for each other and hopefully heal from all the pain that's happening right there. I just finished recording a video about my current mental health state, which is not great. And one thing I had on my to-do list to video was this response video, or at least more of a yes and video on the Thought Spot. I like her videos. It's really great. She does really great autistic advocacy type stuff. And she's been doing this series of like unpacking her own internalized ableism, which is amazing and so needed, and like super kudos for putting that out there. Like, it really takes, I think, a lot of bravery to talk about that kind of stuff, honestly. And she put out this video on why affirmations don't work for neurodivergent folks. And she brought up some really excellent points, but I just wanted to yes and it from the perspective of a late diagnosed adult who is, I suspect, a little older. I'm not sure how old she is. I mean, she looks amazing, so I'm going to guess I don't think very old, but as someone who has been dealing with chronic depression along with what was undiagnosed neurodivergency and now I know is actually neurodivergency, the kind of different perspectives that I might have on this. So just sort of yes-anding it, just like I did with a couple of the other videos by Megan, the I'm Autistic Now What channel, which is also really good. She does such great informative videos. Oh my God, so good. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with this and see how it goes.
This might be a controversial take, but I genuinely believe that affirmations can only take you so far as a neurodivergent person, especially when you're on the journey of trying to actually heal your nervous system, actually reorient your own internal dialogue. Let me explain why. In a day and age where therapy talk is so accessible, we see all the time on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, on X, everywhere, people telling you to just love yourself, to just not worry, all these kinds of affirmations that's supposed to make you feel better about yourself and where you're at in your life. I oftentimes find that those words of affirmation that's supposed to feel like a warm blanket wrapped around you or a balm to your weary soul can land on deaf ears. It feels like nothing. If anything, it feels even more frustrating because it's just another reminder of how broken you may feel or how lost you may be in your life because they don't make you feel better.
100%. What I wanted to add to that, I mean, I've always been that way. We're like, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, okay? Born in 79. And at the height of like the Oprah and her powers in the 90s, the self-help books and the self-love thing, that rhetoric was everywhere. You have to love yourself in order to be loved. Like, no one's going to love you if you don't love yourself first. Like, that stuff was everywhere. And let me tell you, that was so damaging to my mental health as a teenager, hearing that stuff. I can't even begin to tell you how damaging that was. And it was when, I think somewhere on Tumblr, like years ago, which if you know anything about Tumblr, I have no idea how to find this ever again. Because you can't really search Tumblr very easily. And I can't remember the exact words, so I don't know if I would ever actually land on the right post, but somebody posted something about how like that is such a toxic thing to tell somebody who has depression or any other like mental health struggle that includes some type of depression or anxiety, because like inherent in that disorder, you don't feel like you're worthy of love and you don't feel like you are someone who should be loved. And then like to say that like well, you're never going to have love because you can't love yourself. It's like so debilitating. It's like, oh, cool. I need an extra thought just to strengthen the idea that I'm going to be alone the rest of my life and it's going to be horrible. Ugh. So it is really crappy. I think those affirmations always fall a little hollow. And I honestly don't know if they really work that well for even neurotypicals once they hit a certain age. I think there's a fair number of platitudes and cliches that get said that are supposed to be invigorating and is supposed to help our mental health, help us feel more hopeful about things. But I think in reality, I think a lot of those things essentially came out of people wanting to avoid being around people who are upset. It came from like an avoidance of like, we're not going to actually deal with tough emotions. I don't want to actually see you crying and upset. I just want to tell you something positive and move on about my day. And then for people who are struggling with their mental health, that is so invalidating, right? To feel like, well, unless you can at least act happy, you're not even worth being around, is kind of the vibe you get from that. And it is something that people with trauma history feel that, have that issue with, like, if you're constantly in these survival modes, if you're constantly in this chronic stress, high sympathetic activation mode, you aren't going to be okay sitting with somebody who feels awful because you're going to feel probably more powerless. It's probably going to trigger your own flooding of feeling powerless and helplessness and all this stuff. And especially in the last, 100 years or so, we've got whole generations of people who experience such horrific, like, world wars and stuff that I'm sure most of them were emotionally checked out, right? As parents, and then as grandparents, and then those parents were checked out. And so I kind of wonder if we just have some overall societal unlearning to do around this kind of stuff to see, like, can we just learn to sit with people who are grieving or who are just in a bad emotional state without feeling the need to either distract them from it or feel the need to gloss it over with some kind of platitude, So absolutely. The other thing I'm going to do right now, actually, I'm going to increase this watch speed, and it's absolutely no shade to the Thought Spot. She does a really great job of talking, but her speech rate is a little slow for my brain to focus on right now because I also am having a bit of a mental health crisis. So I need it to go a little faster just so that my processing speed, my attention keeps up with it. So that's an accommodation for myself. I'm just letting you know that's what I'm doing so that if you do need to slow her back down, go ahead and slow it down. But I'm going to slow her up to 1.5. Okay, so let's go back to it.
And it makes you wonder, what is supposed to help me then? Because this very medicine that helps a lot of other people out there just isn't really working for me. I also see this disconnect when I observe other neurodivergent people trying really, really hard to affirm themselves every single day when they're dysregulated, when they're overstimulated, when they're ruminating or overthinking. They're trying to take control over their internal spinning out by trying to affirm themselves. They see this modeled all the time online. So it must work, right? It must work for me. Let me give it a try. Only to realize that they're still anxious. They're still dealing with a lot of the issues that is causing that very real spiral. And those pretty little words at the end of the day can only do so much to soothe you.
Yes. So the pretty little words only doing so much to soothe you, 100%. Because the truth is, I think there's a really big difference between thinking something might be true and actually having it feel true, right? Honestly, like, I'm not a huge fan of I'm not a big, like, Hunger Games fan, but I saw the movies, and that was one aspect of, like, the handling of, I think it was PETA's, right? His PTSD or whatever, where he has to ask if it's real or not real kind of a thing. And it was actually really cool to see that in a movie because it's like, I think that is an aspect of this, like, what feels real versus what actually is real can be so different when you are having a mental health crisis, either way, whether it's depression or you're having some sort of mania, right? If you have, like, a bipolar issue, or if you're having an anxiety spiral or whatever it may be, it's just, at least I don't know what it's like to have psychoses. I will say, I have no idea what it's actually like to feel, to really be unsure of what's real and what's not. But when you have these other conditions that don't include more psychotic episodes, or you're not in the middle of one, or somebody who, just has other mental health stuff. Yeah, I think a lot of those words just end up, they sound nice, they sound pleasant, but they don't feel real, right? They don't feel true. And so it's just really hard. I think that's part of, and I don't know if it would technically be appropriately called an affirmation, but I have found one thing that is helpful for me is just thinking of actually things that are empirically true. Because I don't have to struggle with it feeling true. It just is empirically true. So like if I'm heading toward a meltdown, or I feel really overstimulated, or I'm having a bit of a shutdown, or whatever it may be, and I'm really uncomfortable, I definitely have had a habit in the past, and sometimes I still do, of wanting to avoid those feelings a lot, which then just leads to me bottling them up more, and it leads to longer meltdowns, and it's just not a very good, healthy place to be in. So what I have learned is one of the affirmations I tell myself, whether you think this is comforting or not, one of the empirically true things is this meltdown is temporary. Regardless of what I do or don't do to try to manage it, the energy is going to deplete. I'm going to run out, and I'm going to crash from it. And then I'm going to recover from that crash, and then I'll be back to kind of who I am normally, right? So whatever may be, this is still a temporary state of being. This discomfort is temporary. It is going to pass because my body cannot sustain this very long, right? And so and I know other people might be like, that doesn't feel very hopeful. And it's like, honestly, it makes me feel a lot better though, knowing the discomfort is temporary. The discomfort is temporary. It will pass. I don't even have to do anything. It will actually just pass on its own. It just might take longer, but it's still going to pass. It's still a temporary state, And even when I was prior to having medication, even when I had really long depressive episodes where you'd have months of numbness, that still passed, even though it could last months and it could be horrible. And I'm sure some people can last years, but that is still technically a temporary length of time, even if it doesn't feel like it. So that's one of those empirical truths where I'm it can't really be disproven. It just is a fact of life that many things in life are temporary. And so this discomfort is therefore temporary. I don't have to panic about feeling this way the whole time, forever, That just, I don't know. It triggers something in me that it gets the hope back up or something. It makes it a little more tolerable to deal with for myself. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but and I don't know if that's just purely a neurodivergent thing, or just being an older adult thing who's been through a lot of stuff, or just having more of an analytical brain naturally. But if I can think of things in terms of empirical truth, it makes me feel better. So it's not an affirmation. It's just a fact of life. And that makes me feel a little better, I guess. I don't know.
Relate even just a little bit to that experience. I really want to encourage you to be patient with yourself and to not take it to heart too much, because that advice, although has good intentions, isn't working for you for a reason. And it's not because you are broken. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It just means that you have to find something that is somewhat more suitable for you, your neurology, your behavior patterns, your lifestyle, how you tend to operate as a person. If something is not working despite your efforts, that is not failing because you're not doing it good enough.
I just want to restate that, because that is the special sauce that was missing from my life for so long. You are not a failure just because what seems to work for everybody else isn't working for you. That doesn't mean you're failing at using the tool or the strategy correctly. It just means it doesn't work for you, It kind of makes sense. And I don't know if this analogy helps. Sometimes putting this in more of a physical analogy helps me a lot. For people who have genuine food allergies or food intolerances, right? I have a gluten thing, but my friend who's lactose intolerant, okay? I got a friend who's horribly not lactose intolerant, can take some of the little Lactaid pills, but still will have a stomach ache probably. It just won't be as bad, right? So cautious when she decides to have food that have lactose in them, like dairy products, right? And so, if somebody were trying to tell her that to cure some kind of medical situation she's in, she needs to have dairy, and then she eats the dairy and she gets sick from that dairy, she's not a failure because the dairy gave her a stomach ache, right? She has an actual like aversion to that dairy. Like that's just how her body is. That's how her physiology is. So that dairy solution probably won't work for her. Does that make sense? You know? So if you kind of think of it that way, it's like, yeah, that does make sense. That like some people will be like, this totally works for me. And then you try it and you're like, it absolutely does not work for me. And I think that when you're used to having a lot of internalized messaging about how you're doing everything wrong in life, it's so easy to take that as I must have done it wrong. I must have failed at using the strategy. It must be something that makes me also just, you know, horrible or whatever, or a failure. And that's not true. That is not true at all. It's just, think of it like your neurodivergent brain has a little aversion to, you know, maybe some platitudes or cliches. Maybe you have a little aversion to live, laugh, love signs, you know? That's okay. That's okay. You need a different thing. You know what I mean?
You guys to think about and consider is that as a neurodivergent person, the way you operate is oftentimes going to be kind of opposite to the advice that you see people giving to the general public, right? For the general public, they have a tendency to believe that your thoughts impact your actions and then that impacts your life as a whole. So for a lot of neurotypical people, it does actually work for them to tell themselves everything's fine, you don't have to worry, because for the most part, I'm not saying every neurotypical person in every situation is going to be like this, but generally speaking, neurotypical people, when they're anxious about something, are anxious because they may be overthinking it. Generally speaking, they will be fine. And as long as they tell themselves everything's fine, everything's going to work out, life tends to support that narrative.
Yeah. 100% life supports the narrative, especially if you're like more on the neurotypical side where like you don't have to struggle quite as much to function in society. Yeah, you have more probably evidence of success in your life to pull on, which gives you a little more self-esteem and a little more confidence, right? And all that than those of us who face more adversity and like microaggressions and that kind of stuff. Brain fart just happened again. Hold on. Oh, yeah. So what she was just talking about in terms of your thoughts controlling your emotions, like your conscious thoughts helping with your emotions and helping to regulate them, that's a really big piece in like cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, I am not a trained mental health professional. I've just done a lot of research on this stuff and I know something about it, but like I don't have all the sauce on that and all the knowledge on it. But I don't know why I said all the sauce. I don't know. Whatever. I guess maybe I'm hungry. I'm ready for something saucy. Or maybe I just am saucy. Anyway, so cognitive behavioral therapy and it's like kind of offshoots, like I think dialectical behavioral therapy is kind of an offshoot, like so DBT being an offshoot of CBT. This is one of those therapies that's like a big thing in the mental health spaces and a lot of people use it, but there's also a lot of therapists who are kind of questioning its actual efficacy. It seems to work really well under the studied conditions, under more controlled studies, and for more like kind of temporarily alleviating certain symptoms, it seems to work well. But from what I've seen on like the therapist subreddit and from what I've even read from like case studies and stuff from other therapists out there, from practicing clinicians, they're starting to kind of doubt the efficacy of it long-term in terms of actually long-term help and long-term healing of like depressive thoughts or anxious thoughts. So there is sort of that like, it's kind of one of those, even in the mental health circles, it's a little bit debated, it sounds like to me. I might be wrong about that. If you're a mental health practitioner who has more knowledge on that, drop a comment below. I'd love to know a little more. A little more nuance there, because I'm sure there's nuance that I'm missing since it's not really my field. But cognitive behavioral therapy, I believe it's Autism from the Inside. He did a really great video, I want to say at least it's been a couple years ago at least, where he talked about how like CBT type of therapy seems to not really work very well for autistic brains. And I think for like autistic ADHD, like neurodivergencies, they don't always work that well. And I will also say, at least from what I understand of direct trauma therapy, like if you're going to a mental health practitioner to seek help working through trauma and chronic stress and stuff, I think that my understanding is the best practice is a combination of that. CBT is very top down. You're using your conscious thought to like redirect your feelings, and you actually want a combination of that. But what's a really critical initial part is the bottom up regulation, being able to calm the body, being able to like take deep breaths and like kind of recenter your body, and then trying the CBT stuff. Because if you're in a state of like fight or flight or freeze, the cognitive thoughts are not going to actually make much of a shift to the body. If your body's in really high sympathetic activation, if you have that really chronic stress response, or you have that survival mode response going on, that creates we call it downregulation, but essentially the cognitive sides of your brain are not talking very well or even getting input from the more subconscious parts of your brain where all those emotions and all that stuff is happening. Okay. And so, that part of the brain, like the subconscious parts aren't listening to the conscious parts very well anyway, which is one of the reasons why things like affirmations and CBT type of top-down things don't really work unless you can get yourself into a more kind of grounded, calm, rest and digest, parasympathetic state. Then you might be able, then it's like your body might listen essentially to your brain. Your subconscious parts, your emotional centers might actually listen a little more to your conscious thought. So just to let you know, I don't know that it's necessarily working for neurotypicals either, really. And also, quite frankly, I think there are a lot of people who would say they're neurotypical who actually are probably dealing with a lot of like trauma and chronic stress in life that it's actually affecting them physiologically enough that they probably aren't as neurotypical as they think they are. You know what I mean? So, so even that stuff, it might help them feel better temporarily in the moment, but it might not actually serve them long term. So this is just to reemphasize that whether you're neurodivergent or not, whether you identify as neurodivergent or not, you're definitely not a failure for not having this top-down stuff only be the thing that works for you. Just to let you know.
Oh, everything was fine. I was overthinking. Okay, that's the thing to keep in mind here. That's the issue for neurodivergence. We tell ourselves we're going to be fine when we don't feel like we are, but because life as a whole doesn't understand or integrate neurodivergent people well into society, it actually ends up reinforcing our negative thoughts as a truth rather than the affirmations we're trying to tell ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, this is actually a really big piece also to look into. If the thought spot, I don't know your name, sorry, but if you ever happen to see this video, look into the minority stress model literature, research-wise. Go to like Google Scholar and look into minority stress model, because that is one of the biggest, I think personally, it was so eye-opening to me, and it's so like, it did kind of affirm, some of my stance on this stuff, but that was initially developed for transgender people and has since been applied to neurodivergence and other people of other minoritized groups in society. And essentially what it's consistently found is that mental health wise, there's always been this like, I wonder what's so wrong with these marginalized groups. They have way higher rates of depression and anxiety and blah, 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 and like, why in the world would all these marginalized people have such high rates of depression and anxiety? Gee, it's a mystery. And what the minority stress model has consistently shown is that even including a mental health practitioner, if you do not consider societal adversity and like just constantly being saturated with negative societal messaging around yourself and the kind of marginalizations you belong to, your intersectionalities, your identities, these particular groups, the kind of messaging you get from society, if it's just constant negative, constant invisibility, constant like lack of representation, always feeling invisible, always feeling like a side character, always feeling like the background, like nobody cares, or just always getting the message that you are just a failure because of how you are, or like you need to be better, you need to do this, you need to do that, right? Like we constantly get these messages that is the biggest, highest correlation, like positive correlation with high rates of depression and anxiety in a marginalized group. So if you're looking at a marginalized group and other researchers are like, these people tend to have a lot of depression and anxiety, what usually, if you look at their actual marginalizations and their experiences of societal adversity, that is the strongest correlation as to possibly why they have that depression and anxiety, which is kind of what she's getting at, because like the societal messaging definitely impacts our mental health and our mental state. And these like solely looking at individual approaches, solely looking at it as like, I am the individual, I have to, bootstrap my mental health and pull myself up all by myself, is not actually effective. What all the research is showing is really that people need a lot more connection to community and family, and like a feeling of safety and a feeling like, yeah, this community is going to care for me even if I'm not perfect. That's what most people need. And people with more societal privilege tend to feel that way more often. They feel like they can mess up, they can get forgiven, they can have more successes if they fail. They have less of a fear around that because they feel like they are protected a bit because they have privilege, right? And, you know, for myself, I have certain privileges that make me feel a lot safer than other people. But that is just to say, yes, societal adversity definitely needs to be taken into account in your mental health. And personally, I think if you're receiving mental health help with a professional, if you're seeing a counselor or a mental health practitioner in any capacity, I'm hoping that they understand, especially with neurodivergence. I think one of the most critical parts that's missing from neurodivergent affirming care in mental health, and definitely in my field and in other therapies, is this lack of acknowledging and also understanding and continuing to learn and deconstruct societal biases and the types of adversity that will be faced by neurodivergence and that has been already faced and will continue to be faced. Without acknowledging the need for that side, you're always missing a really big piece, in my opinion, of what a lot of neurodivergents need.
People tend to believe that if you change your thoughts, that changes your action, which changes your life. But for neurodivergent people, we have to understand that our thoughts are the hardest part to change. And the only way to change our thoughts is to actually change it through action. If we show up enough and consistently, we eventually will show our thoughts what the new reality is. And that's the difference. Our external reality needs to change our internal reality. For example, if you're a person that doesn't trust themselves and you try to tell yourself again and again and again, I could do this, I could do that, I can trust myself, I can follow through, I'm reliable, and then you simply just don't follow through because of your executive dysfunction, you don't feed yourself when you're hungry, you don't drink water when you need it, you don't sleep enough because you're up at night trying to do the things that you weren't able to do the whole day because you were at work, you're flaking on your friends that you care about because you're too tired, you're not paying your bills because you forgot or you're too cognitively exhausted to even get that task started. These are just some of the many areas of our lives that we tend to neglect because of our executive dysfunction. And simply telling yourself you can do it and you could trust yourself is not going to make you feel any better. So long as we sit here battling our internal narrative of, I feel like shit, I don't believe in myself, but I'm telling myself I could believe in myself, and I'm telling myself I shouldn't feel like shit. This is why we become paralyzed and we end up not being able to do much with our actual physical world.
That's such a good point too. And honestly, this is sort of on my platform of like in my little soapbox of like, people are always like, you need to work on your self-esteem. How many of us have heard that our whole lives, basically? You need to work on your confidence and your self-esteem. And then it's like, you know what? Confidence and self-esteem do not just develop in a freaking vacuum. You don't just talk yourself into it, really. You could do the fake it till you make it thing, I guess, but like, if all you're encountering are constant failures, that's gonna knock down your self-esteem and your confidence, because like you don't see fruits of the labor that you put in to try to do something well. All you got told is that you didn't do it well enough, and you didn't try hard enough, and you failed at this and you failed at that and you failed at this, right? And it's like, that's not gonna build confidence at all, right? We need positive reinforcement usually to build some level of self-confidence and self-esteem. We need positive messaging and positive reinforcement. And this is true across kids too. This is what all the literature on like child rearing and stuff shows. Like, they need to know what they do well. They need to understand what their strengths are. And I think for a lot of neurodivergents, we are literally never told at all what those strengths are, unless, you know, and then I will say, I have seen this too with professionals where like, when you try to ask them what the strengths are, all they can list is like, well, they really like Pokemon. Like, they list like special interest, and I'm like, that's not a strength. Like, what are their actual personal strengths? You know, like, are they considerate? Are they playful? Are they introspective? Like, we have to think more about what are the strengths this neurodivergent child? What are their strengths? Not like, oh, they seem to really like these toys. We'll call that a strength, I guess. And it's like, wow, we got to do a lot more work to have people look at the actual positives that are actually there. But it's very hard when the narrative is always the chronic issue and the chronic, like the heartbreaking side of all of it, right? So it's really part of that, like, maybe focus less on building self-esteem. I think that's what she's getting at with like the actions help, because yes, doing things and kind of congratulating yourself about, even if it's the tiny little baby step of something.
Baby step onto the elevator. Baby steps into the elevator. I'm in the elevator.
That does help to build more confidence and self-esteem and more belief. At least at minimum, it gives you more belief in your own ability to persevere, you know, your ability to persist and just keep on trucking.
Keep trucking.
You know, which sometimes that is, I like to say, you know, that's what you need, basically. Sometimes if you're feeling really depressed, what you need is just knowing that you can just keep moving forward, and at some point you'll break through that feeling a bit. You know, it might come back because life is a bitch sometimes, so things might trigger it again, but you can persevere through it. You can keep going, you know? And that's not a small thing. Having persistence is not a small thing. It's not a minute thing. That is a big executive function skill, quite frankly. And it's a strength. Okay? It's something to be proud of, in my opinion.
Just make your reality what you need it to be, regardless of whether or not your internal world resonates with that external world yet. Because for a long time, it won't. And that's okay. That's part of that neurodivergent journey. You still have to show up for yourself, regardless of whether or not it feels immediately resonant with you. That's part of that neurodivergent journey. You still have to show up for yourself, regardless of whether or not it feels immediately resonant with you. You still do it, and you still do it regardless of the outcome. Right? Show yourself you're trustworthy through your action. Show yourself you're lovable through action.
Kind of love that. Show yourself you're trustworthy through your action. Like, show it to yourself. You can trust yourself with yourself. I kind of love that. That's really nice. That's a nice thought of, like, essentially it's like a you do you, right? It's like no one else might understand it, and other people might not trust you, but you can trust yourself to take care of yourself. That is a really important skill. It's kind of like that self-soothing idea. And that's a good thought. Maybe instead of self-love, you should focus on, like, just trusting in yourself a little bit more to just be able to take care of yourself a little bit.
Yourself. I'm worthy. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be understood. Show yourself that. Show yourself what it means to understand yourself. Show yourself what it means to love yourself. Unconditional love means being willing to show up for someone and take care of them, regardless of if they earned it or not, regardless of if they're worthy or not.
That is such a big piece for me, even as a 46-year-old, like, learning that building a relationship on love needs to be based in, there is a give and take in the sense of who has the energy to do more caregiving than the other sometimes. But it's not transactional. It's not, well, I did this for you, so you should do this now, right? It's not, well, I did the dishes last week, so you should do them this week. It's not that. It's, you know, which it could be, like, if you're doing proper division of labor or whatever, but sometimes in life, division of labor isn't possible. Because sometimes one person is going to be having a harder time than the other mental health wise, or they're going to be having more of a stressful time at work and be more exhausted. And that's when the other person, if they have the energy, they can step up and do more of those things. And the whole point of it not being transactional and being more relationship based and being more based on just having the desire to look after this person means being willing to do that additional work for them, and then also having faith and knowing that they will return the favor in the future, right? Like, the transactional part is just based in mutual respect and desire to take care of each other. This is going down a little information hole in a soapbox that I want to get into in future videos. Probably it's not the time for it right now. Also, what I was going to say in addition to that is, like, learning to have that for myself too. Learning that it's not transactional for myself. That if I do one act of self-care for myself, or I take time off for my mental health, or I have less productive days because of my mental health or because of my energy level, having enough compassion to realize that does not mean that I have to make it up to myself by having super efficient, highly, like, super on it kind of days. The truth is, I might have those days anyway, but, like, I shouldn't have to put myself in a position where it's like, well, you know, I ate a little ice cream as a comfort thing, or I just had a comfort same day food, so therefore for the next 3 days I have to eat super, super perfectly or whatever. You know, it's like, no, it's not transactional. You're not trying to do a transaction with self-care, right? yes, things need to be done in moderation in order to maintain your health, like sure, but it's not this transactional, I did one thing good for myself and now I need to beat myself up so that I can do more things for other people. You know, it's like, that's not a great way to go about it, to be like, well, I can do one day of self-care and then I have to do 2 weeks of focusing on my job and everybody else in my life. It's like, no, it's not transactional. It is not transactional. It is about constantly checking in with compassion with yourself and what you need at the time. And then what is possible in the realm of your life in terms of managing your life while also having some level of self-compassion with how you're talking to yourself through it. You know, it's tough though.
So on those days where you feel the most shitty about yourself and you have absolutely no self-esteem, are you abandoning yourself even more? Or are you actually showing up for yourself? Being sure to feed yourself a really nice meal that makes you feel cared for, that makes you feel an ounce of enjoyment out of your day? Or are you allowing yourself to just cry without judging yourself? And here's the thing, you guys. Showing yourself that you are worthy means that you're willing to love yourself even in moments where you don't feel like you deserve it, even when you don't really know how to do it. Being willing to love yourself, even if it's unfamiliar, even if it's just experimental, even if you don't really feel like you deserve it, is how you start the journey of actually affirming yourself.
That's such a good message, honestly, that like it can be such a like a tiny, tiny thing. Like I'm trying to learn that myself, where it's like I'm going through a process of trying to learn to essentially celebrate even when I manage to do tiny things. Like, especially, you know, right now going through a lot of depression and personal life upheaval stuff. It's like, if I manage to do this much, cool, that's a win. You know, if I manage to process through something, that's a win. You know, if I don't feel ashamed of crying, that's a win. Right? Like if I go ahead and let myself cry, that's a win. If I just eat a comfort food just for the sake of the comfort, that's a win. Because a lot of times if I'm depressed, I tend to not eat at all. So like, yeah, it might not be the healthiest food, but hey, I ate something. That's a win. Like, good job. Good job, me. You know, it's that thing where like society would say, well, that's not a big deal, or you shouldn't even be doing that, or like, that's not even a good thing to do. Why did you even bother with that? And it's like, that was actually an act of self-care. And like, that was actually a win for me to do that. So, and like, being able to accept that, I guess. It's tough though. It is really tough. I'm not great at it, but it is a really important message. And I really am grateful that she reinforced that message for me and for others out there.
To be willing to do that regardless of the outcome. And that's the tricky part, because we live in a society where we want to see immediate gratification. And when there's not an immediate gratification, we believe there's something wrong with what we're doing. We're either doing it wrong or the thing that we're doing is wrong. Shouldn't I feel great? Shouldn't I feel loved if I'm willing to love myself? So how come when I'm tending to myself on an off day and taking care of myself, I still feel like shit? It takes time. Nothing changes overnight. Think about it. If it took practically our whole lifetime to break our neurodivergence down to a point where we're trying to chronically operate as neurotypical people, how many years of consistently trying to reorient our lives towards neurodivergence is it going to take for us to finally operate and benefit from a neurodivergent friendly life?
It takes a long time. And also, I don't even know, honestly, I don't even know if it's ever a thing we arrive at really per se, because our home life could maybe be more neurodivergent friendly, but the world itself will still not be. So it's like, we're always going to have to juggle stuff. And I don't know, I don't have an answer beyond always just feeling a low grade anger that just sort of simmers underneath for a lot of those things. I don't really have an answer beyond that, but maybe other people do. If you do, put it in a comment below. But like, it does take a long time. And I also really like, this kind of brought up to mind the whole like loving yourself thing. I liked, there's this thing that I saw on Tumblr once also years ago that kind of rewired my brain, which was, don't bother loving yourself, just learn to love being yourself. Like, just learn to love like just existing as who you are whenever you can. So like, if you're just chilling at home doing your hyperfixation, like relaxation hyperfixation, you know, like if you do puzzles or something or whatever, or you're gaming, like just don't, definitely, you know, try at least. Maybe that's the place to start with, like, not judging. Like, that's just a thing you love doing. Your brain loves this and you enjoy it so much. Just enjoy it. Just give yourself permission to enjoy it, man. Like, yeah, 100%.
You have to put in that work consistently, even if you don't reap the benefits of that outcome for however long. And it's going to take time, regardless of if it only takes a week or a month or a few months or a year or many years. You have to be willing to show yourself love, to show up for yourself, to put in the work for yourself, even if you don't immediately believe it, even if you don't immediately feel that relief. You have to be willing to do it.
I do want to say, though, if you're in the midst of like a depression and your energy is so low, don't put pressure on yourself to do consistent work. You know, you don't have to keep going for a while. Like, I mean, keep like persisting in the sense that, you know, keep things going in your life as much as you can. Yes. But like, I think part of that self-care and compassion is accepting that there will be times in life, there will be times with your mental health where you can't get that much done. And that's okay. The sky is not going to fall, right? You do deserve rest. You deserve to recover. You deserve to not have to be always on it, always productive, right? That also can be self-care, honestly. So whatever feels like work in this like path toward mental health, don't put it on yourself as a piece of pressure to continue to think, well, I have to do something for self-care today. I have to do this. I should be doing that. No, it's really more about, and I don't think that's what she meant, but just in case, if the idea of putting in consistent work to see results started feeling like to you, because sometimes in like right now with my depths of depression, it feels too much. The idea of constantly putting in work every single day, no. No, I don't think I'm gonna have the energy for that most of the time. But what I could have the energy for is allowing myself to rest when my brain and body say, we need to rest. Crafting out some amount of time for that. Even if I can't do it immediately, making sure I prioritize it as soon as I can, you know, and not working on myself, just existing and being okay with that. Sometimes that's the best self-care there is, you know?
That sort of detachment, I think, is very hard for a lot of neurodivergent people to master because we either care so much that we become extremely disappointed when we don't see an immediate outcome happen or an immediate gratification or an immediate synchronization of everything. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because outcome for us is encouragement of we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing. Either that or we become very nihilistic about things, very apathetic about things. I've met so many neurodivergent people that are tricking themselves into being the most apathetic, skeptical, cynical person because they're trying to trick themselves into being realistic, when in reality, you're just living another level of delusion, right?
It's tough. It's tricky because like for me, for example, in my little situation, I always end up having a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. And I always, like I said, overstay my welcome in relationships with people because I always have hope that somehow like repair can be done, you know, and work can be done and things don't have to be a complete loss. But if I hold on to that for too long, it ends up hurting a lot in the long run. So I can definitely understand wanting to kind of temper hope, right? Which I think might be what she's kind of getting at here. And you can definitely go too far with trying to temper hope and optimism, right? And like go too far into cynicism and pessimism as a way to protect yourself from things going wrong. Because like if you are already prepared for the worst, then if something goes well, it's like, oh, isn't that a pleasant surprise? Right? It's like, well, that's nice. But, you know, it can be a way of once again avoiding like actually caring for yourself, right? If you're just constantly putting yourself in this protection mode of like, I'm just going to have to constantly be cynical and nihilistic and pessimistic about the world so that I don't feel disappointed or horrible about the world. Or maybe it's a way of dealing with lack of control in the world and the fact that so many horrible things happen all the time. And as individuals, there's only so much we could do, you know, whatever it may be. If that becomes more of like a protective shield to you, it can definitely be more harmful in the long run in terms of developing true community and relationships and even doing self-care. And at the same time, being too hopeful, too positive, too optimistic to the point where you're not able to even consider that things aren't going well is also not healthy, right? But I think a lot of the stuff is just stuff a lot of people in general do as a way to try to protect ourselves from pain, because feeling pain and feeling uncomfortable is just hard, and it sucks, and we hate it, and it's draining. And in our current world, we don't have that much time to rest and recuperate. So it's like we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we use whatever method we can to push. And so with that, I just want to say, I think that, once again, I lost my train of thought. Let me try that again. That's what it was. It was going toward the more immediate stuff, looking for immediate remedy of the discomfort. And I definitely feel that. It's really, I always want to avoid the discomfort, and then I want immediate relief. I've wanted that my whole life, I think, because it's so overwhelming and it's dysregulating, because the sensory experience of really challenging emotions is just so much for me. It's just so overwhelming and so intense, and I hate it. And that's why, like, honestly, my strongest affirmation at this point in life anyway is that this discomfort is temporary. The discomfort is temporary. And even if I do the tiniest something, even this much alleviation of that discomfort is something, right? First off. And second off, I don't actually have to work. It will just go ahead and pass on at some point. It'll pass its way through me at some point, right? Now, it does pass a lot better and a lot easily and a lot more effectively now that I have more medication and stuff. So if things linger for you for a really long time, it might just be a really good consideration to seek out a neurodivergent affirming mental health practitioner and, like, maybe consider some level of medication, or not. Maybe just having more affirmation and validation and normalization from somebody will help a lot. You know, it's like the best part of mental health counseling is when they kind of validate how you're feeling and you just feel a little less alone, you know? Sometimes that's the best.
I think landing in this area is dangerous because you think you're being realistic. So you don't see a need to change that aspect of being skeptical because you actually think you're doing something good for yourself, when in reality, you're blinding yourself from seeing when something works out in your favor or when something could have gone really wrong, but it didn't, right? And I think part of being neutral on this journey and accepting all different outcomes for what it is being open to the good and the bad. And I think a lot of people don't feel like they have the capacity for that. And so they try to choose either end of the spectrum. Being realistic is being able to still care regardless of the outcome. And being able to still care and see the good and bad in everything is actually something that allows you to better check in with yourself, with your life, and respond accordingly.
It's a really good point. And I just thought of a really nice analogy, actually, when it comes to, like, keeping a neutral stance on this, like, self-care journey, right? And, like, learning how to, like, help yourself through a tough time and tough mental health, like, dips and stuff. And I was actually just thinking about it, like, if you go on a flight, right? Like, if you've been on any kind of, you know, 4-hour plus or whatever flight recently, you know, you see people bringing stuff with them to help them feel more comfortable on that flight, right? Because the seats are all tiny and it's hard to sleep and la la la. So people bring, like, the neck pillows, and they bring, like, eye masks, and they bring, you know, their iPad that's loaded up with shows, you know, and you bring your noise canceling things, and I bring my earplugs, you know, and other people maybe bring earplugs too, you know, and maybe they bring snacks on, and they bring their coffee on from the terminal and stuff, right? It's like, we often don't mind doing things to help ourselves physically feel more comfortable along what is expected to be a relatively uncomfortable journey, right? And I think self-care through mental health dips is kind of like that, right? Like, staying neutral is the idea of, like, what's your version of, like, a noise canceling headphone, you know, headphones on an airplane right now? Like, what's your version of, like, buying some snacks for the flight, you know, right now, right? Is it just watching a comfort show? Is it doing some sort of comfortable special interest thing? Is it engaging in a community online that's just fun? Is it, you know, going out and doing, like, board games or something at a group? Like, whatever it may be, you know? Is it just doing more puzzles or Rubik's Cubes or whatever? Is that your version of essentially a little travel pillow to just help you feel a little more comfortable while you're kind of crammed in and just going through this kind of journey, right? And so I don't know if that analogy would help anybody, but it just popped into my head while she was talking, and it actually really helped me out for just a second. It's like, hey, that's a good way to look at it. your comfort foods, your same day foods, your whatever those things are that help you to feel a little more at peace and more restful and a little more cared for. Like, it's cool, man. You're on an uncomfortable journey. It's like being crammed into the smallest economy seats on a long haul flight. And it's okay to do whatever you need to do to be more comfortable, even though it still won't be ideal, right? It still won't be the best. You're still not on like some private jet or in like those really swanky, suites or whatever on those, like I think Singapore Air and stuff have like those whole rooms or whatever, right? You're not there, right? You're just stuck in this little sardini, like, and when you're having a mental health dip, it's like, that's kind of what it's like. You're just kind of on this like, crappy journey, and it's gonna suck. And there's no reason to lie to yourself. It's gonna suck. Hey, this is how it goes. But like, self-care can be any tiny thing you do to help the journey be just that much more tolerable. My first like really good counselor that I went to for a couple years, who was just phenomenal and wonderful, she said something to me once. She was saying, the goal internally is to feel a little more at peace. And at the time I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that means to feel at peace. I got way too much anxiety going on to feel at peace, And what I've since learned is that when bad times hit, when grief hits really hard, the peace is not going to be there. And that's okay. And even if you've never experienced it, that's okay. It's actually not impossible, though. It's not impossible to get there, to feel at peace. So your goal isn't so much to feel happy, because happy is fleeting. Emotions are fleeting. But to feel more at peace with who you are is really the goal, and to feel more comfortable so that you can so that when you're by yourself or when you're doing whatever you want to do, that's actually restorative to you. I think that's the idea, is like, you want to feel more at peace with who you are and yourself and your life, at least enough that as you go forward and when things get hard, you can still find little teeny moments of rest, Anyway, I don't know if this was helpful, but hopefully it was. And like I said, I really enjoyed the Thought Spot. She's a great person to go check out if you've never checked her out. I'm also a very tiny channel, though, so I'm going to guess most people kind of know what's out there probably. But anyway, let me know in the comments below if anything I said rang true or anything she said rang true. If you have a different interpretation, let me know. And yeah, let's all just kind of keep helping ourselves get through right now, everything, because the world is a rough place right now. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps a little bit. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't. That would be helpful. Share it around or whatever. The longer you watch, the better. Also for a channel, that's just really great, and it really means a lot to me. Any little thing helps on the journey. For me, thank you so much for your support. And as I keep saying, I'm reclaiming the word weird for myself. So for those out there who feel like you're weird, let's just reclaim that and use our weirdness powers for good as a way to connect with each other and build more safe community, and just to help us all heal. So in that spirit, I wish for you all to keep it weird. And until next time, guys, bye.